I thought losing my father would break me. But it was my sister, the one person I trusted, who taught me what betrayal really feels like. She didn't just take my inheritance, she erased me from our family's story. And for a long time I let her. This isn't about money. It's about silence, survival, and finally saying the things I was taught never to say out loud. Growing up in a quiet house in upstate New York, I was always the invisible daughter. My name is Rachel Morgan, 34 years old now, a school counselor by profession. I spent most of my childhood fading into the background while my younger sister Jessica, 2 years my junior, took center stage. Jessica was the golden child, charming, reckless, endlessly adored by our father. Dad's eyes would light up when she walked into a room, while mine seemed to go unnoticed, like a shadow blending into the wallpaper. Jessica's charm was magnetic. She could talk her way out of almost anything and was expert at playing the victim when it suited her. She was the sister everyone noticed, the one who could make a mess and still get forgiven. I was the quiet one, the dependable, responsible daughter who kept things together when no one else would. Dad was a large man with broad shoulders and a booming laugh that filled the house, even in the darkest times. He ran a small antiques business downtown, a modest but beloved family legacy. Mom passed away when we were young, leaving Dad to raise us alone. That loss shaped everything. The silences, the roles we fell into, the way Jessica took on the part of the spirited child who needed protection, and I became the caretaker in the shadows. I was 33 when Dad's health started to fail. It was a slow unraveling. Heart problems at first, then the creeping fog of memory loss that scared me more than anything else. I was the one who organized his doctor's appointments, managed his medications and stayed overnight at the hospital. Jessica was too busy most of the time, often out of town or distracted by her own life. She'd call occasionally, full of rehearsed concern, but her presence was fleeting, like a ghost passing through the house. When Dad finally died, it was just the two of us in the room. Jessica with her practiced grief and me with the exhaustion of years spent carrying the weight alone. At the funeral, Jessica took control, effortlessly charming relatives and neighbors. I stood at the edge, clutching a cracked photo frame of Mom and Dad, feeling smaller than ever. It was during the reading of the will that everything shattered. The modest house, the savings account, the antique store, all left entirely to Jessica. I had seen a draft will months before and signed that Dad and I had talked about together. It was clear, 50-50, just like he promised in the text he sent me during his last lucid days. But the final will, signed when his mind was slipping, named Jessica as the sole heir and executor. She had manipulated him during his decline, weaponizing charm and false vulnerability to erase me. That day the betrayal burned through me sharper than grief itself. The sister I thought I could trust had rewritten our family's story, and erased me from it. In the weeks that followed, I found myself spiraling into a silence so deep it was nearly physical. The house felt emptier than ever, the antique store a mausoleum of memories. It was in this darkness that I first reached out to Dr. Elena Grant, my therapist. Elena was in her mid-40s with a calm presence that felt like a balm to my fractured spirit. Her office was painted a soft blue, filled with warm light and quiet patience. She never pushed me beyond what I was ready for but always guided me toward naming the pain I had buried for so long. "You've been surviving in the margins, Rachel," she said in our first session. "Now it's time to take up space in your own life." Elena helped me unravel the years of neglect and silence that shaped who I was, and who I still wanted to be. Maya Daniels was another pillar of strength. My best friend since college, Maya was everything I was not: loud, fearless, and unapologetically herself. She worked as a social worker, which meant she understood trauma and resilience in ways few others could. Maya never let me disappear into myself. She sent messages filled with encouragement, dragged me out of my apartment for coffee, and reminded me every day that I was worth fighting for. Then there was Ben Carter, my ex-boyfriend from years ago. Ben was kind and emotionally available in a way that had been foreign to me growing up. But even he couldn't quite grasp the gravity of my family's history or the layers of my silence. When I reached out to him after Dad's death, his simple words, "I'm glad you're talking to someone now," were both comforting and a quiet reminder of how alone I really was. And cousin Troy, the blunt, no-nonsense relative who saw through the family's charade better than anyone else. Troy had always been like an uncle to me, often offering quiet support when others turned away. He was one of the few who understood the undercurrents of manipulation and resentment running beneath the polished surface of our family gatherings. These people, Elena, Maya, Ben, Troy, they became my lifelines as I began to unravel the knot of my past. One autumn afternoon, sitting in Dr. Grant's waiting room, I held the cracked photo frame again. It was worn from years of handling, the glass fractured but still holding the image of a family that had never been whole. The pain of exclusion burned anew as I thought about the will, about the sister who had stolen my inheritance, Not just of things but of my place in our family's history. Elena's office door opened and she smiled gently. "Ready to start?" she asked. And for the first time in years I said yes. The first few sessions with Dr. Grant felt like walking through a fog. Memories I had long buried surfaced unexpectedly, small, sharp moments from my childhood that made my chest tighten. She listened without interruption, offering gentle prompts that made me dig deeper. One afternoon she asked me about Jessica. "What was she like when you were young?" Elena's voice was soft but steady. I paused, the familiar ache rising. She was everything I wasn't. Loud, fearless, impossible to ignore. Dad adored her. I was just there. Quiet. Reliable. My fingers traced the cracked edge of the photo frame still sitting on my lap. I was the one who never caused trouble, who kept things together. But no one ever looked for me. Elena nodded thoughtfully. That kind of invisibility can hurt more than people realize. You were taught to stay silent to avoid conflict. But silence can become its own prison. The truth of that statement struck me hard. Years of holding my tongue, swallowing resentment and pain, had left me feeling hollow and stuck. Elena encouraged me to set boundaries, not with loud arguments or confrontations, but by learning to say no to being erased. Outside therapy, Maya was relentless in pulling me back to life. One evening she showed up at my apartment with takeout and a stack of movies. "No talking about family tonight," she declared with a grin. "Just us and some bad rom-coms." Her presence was a warm reminder that life could be more than pain and silence. She was the loud counterpoint to my quiet, the friend who refused to let me fade. Meanwhile, I tentatively reconnected with Ben. Our meetings were slow and careful, filled with pauses and unfinished sentences. But with him I learned to let my guard down, even if only a little. He never pushed me to open up but held space when I chose to. Yet, every time I saw Jessica's name pop up on my phone, a cold knot formed in my stomach. After the will, she had contacted me only a handful of times, mostly legal notices or attempts at surface-level civility. Her voice, when I finally heard it, was smooth, practiced. "Rachel, we should talk. Family means everything." But what did family mean when she had rewritten the rules to erase me? One afternoon cousin Troy called. His gravelly voice carried a weight of unspoken understanding. "I heard about the will. I'm sorry, Rachel. You didn't deserve this." Troy's blunt honesty was both comforting and painful. "She's not the sister I knew growing up," I confessed. "She's someone else now." He sighed. "Family's complicated. But you have to protect yourself." I was beginning to learn what that meant. Months later I took a small but significant step. I started a blog, a quiet space to share stories about trauma, healing, and resilience. It wasn't about exposing Jessica or our family drama. It was about finding my voice and helping others find theirs. The response surprised me. People connected with the raw honesty I offered. Slowly, the blog grew into a podcast, where I invited guests to talk about surviving emotional neglect and reclaiming identity. The antique store, once a shrine to the past, transformed into a community space. I hosted small gatherings, workshops, and healing circles. It wasn't what Dad had imagined, but it was mine, built from broken pieces with cracks that let the light in. One evening, standing in the soft glow of string lights hung across the store's ceiling, I held the cracked photo frame in my hands. I traced the fractures with my finger, accepting the imperfections. The frame was a symbol, not of brokenness but of survival. Jessica's last attempt at contact was a birthday card, unsigned but unmistakably hers. I left it unopened on my kitchen counter, then deleted her number from my phone. The silence that followed was not emptiness. It was peace. Later, I returned to the lake where I had once swum to wash away the past. This time I swam freely, unburdened. The water closed gently over my head, and when I surfaced, I was lighter than I had ever been. I realized then I was no longer invisible. I was here, whole, and finally I was free. In the months that followed, I found a quiet strength growing inside me, something I hadn't known existed before. Therapy with Dr. Grant was no longer just a weekly obligation. It became a lifeline. She helped me name the emotions I'd buried so long: anger, grief, guilt, and most of all, a deep-seated sadness that came from feeling unseen by the people who should have known me best. "Your feelings are valid, Rachel," Elena reminded me one chilly morning. "You don't owe anyone silence, especially not when that silence costs you your identity." Those words echoed through the hollow spaces inside my heart. I began to realize that my silence had been a survival mechanism, but survival wasn't enough anymore. I wanted to live. Fully. Honestly. Thankfully, Maya continued to be my anchor in the storm. Her apartment, filled with colorful art and the smell of fresh coffee, became my refuge on days when the world felt too heavy. She never pushed me to talk about Jessica or the will, but her unwavering presence was a constant reminder that I wasn't alone. "You're not just surviving, Rachel," she said during one of our late-night talks. "You're reclaiming your story." Reclaiming my story meant redefining what family meant to me. It meant accepting that Jessica wasn't the sister I had thought she was, and that her choices reflected her own fears and selfishness, not my worth. It also meant recognizing the family I chose. The people who saw me, who listened, who loved me without conditions. Ben came back into my life slowly, cautiously. Our relationship never reignited, but we built a new kind of friendship. One grounded in honesty and respect. He was still gentle, still kind, but I no longer needed him to fix what had been broken inside me. That was my work. The antiques business became a symbol of my transformation. I took on new projects there, turning it into a healing space for others who had experienced loss or trauma. Each vintage item was a reminder that things, and people, could carry scars and still hold value. I curated collections, hosted small community gatherings, and even started workshops on emotional wellness. It wasn't what Dad had planned, but it felt right, like I was finally building something that belonged to me. Occasionally, I'd hear whispers from extended family members, like Aunt Denise or Cousin Troy, offering quiet support but also reminders of the complicated history we all shared. Troy's blunt words were the clearest. "Jessica's choices are her own. Don't let them define your life." One late winter evening, I sat by the fireplace in the family home, the soft crackle of flames filling the room. I held the old and signed draft of Dad's will in my hands, words penned in his shaky handwriting, promising equal shares and fairness. I looked at it for a long time before finally letting it go, watching the paper curl and blacken in the fire's glow. It was a symbolic release of the past, the unfairness, the betrayal, and the silence. When Jessica sent me that last birthday card, I didn't open it. I didn't respond. Instead, I deleted her number from my phone, a small but significant act of reclaiming my boundaries. That night, I went back to the lake, the one place that had always been my refuge. I slipped into the cold water alone, feeling the embrace of the deep, cool silence. The surface rippled around me as I swam, the weight of years lifting with each stroke. When I emerged, breathless and free, I understood that I was no longer defined by my past or my family's story. I was my own person with a voice and a future. I was no longer invisible. After that night at the lake, something shifted inside me, a subtle but undeniable opening. The water had washed away more than just the cold. It had swept clean years of self-doubt and invisible scars. For the first time, I felt ready to live beyond the shadow of my family's past. In therapy, I started exploring the roots of my conflict avoidance, the ways I had learned to silence myself in order to keep peace. Dr. Grant gently challenged me to confront the belief I'd held since childhood, that my feelings were somehow less important than Jessica's or Dad's. "You grew up being invisible, Rachel," she said. "Now you have to find what makes you visible to yourself." I began small, saying no to extra shifts at work, setting boundaries with acquaintances who drained me emotionally, speaking up in staff meetings when I had something to say. Each act felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that had been tucked away for too long. Maya was my cheerleader through all of it. She insisted I celebrate the small victories. "You're not the quiet girl in the corner anymore," she said one afternoon as we shared a late lunch. "You're a woman who knows her worth." It was in this spirit of quiet rebellion that I started the podcast. A platform for stories like mine, for voices often silenced by family dynamics, trauma, or shame. The podcast became my public declaration that I would no longer disappear. Each episode brought new courage, new listeners who resonated with the messy, complicated process of healing. Jessica predictably faded more and more from my life. Her attempts at contact became less frequent and more superficial. Birthday cards, holiday messages that felt like formalities rather than attempts at genuine connection. I realized that I didn't want to be part of a relationship built on control and manipulation. One afternoon, as I was organizing old family photos at the antique store, I came across an old mug, a chipped, faded thing with the words, "World's Best Dad," scrawled clumsily across it. I cradled it in my hands and smiled softly. That mug was a relic of simpler times, of moments when my father's love felt unconditional, even if it was unevenly distributed. I placed the mug on the shelf as a reminder, not of pain or loss, but of the complexity of love and the possibility of healing. It was a symbol of my own journey, imperfect, fragile, but real. In the quiet moments, I thought about how far I'd come, from the invisible girl shadowed by her golden sister to a woman who was finally visible to herself. The road hadn't been easy. There were setbacks, moments when the old wounds flared and I felt tempted to retreat. But each time I chose to step forward. And so, on a bright spring morning, I stood by the lake again. The water was cool and inviting. I slipped in, the familiar embrace surrounding me, and I swam with no fear of drowning in the past. The world above was fresh, full of possibility. When I climbed out, I looked at the sky and whispered, "I am here." For the first time, those words felt true. The weeks after that swim by the lake unfolded like a quiet revolution inside me. I found myself standing taller, speaking more clearly, and embracing the space I'd always hesitated to claim. Therapy sessions with Dr. Grant became a sanctuary where I could untangle the knots of my past without fear of judgment. She guided me gently, encouraging me to identify the patterns of self-effacement that had governed my life for too long. "There's power in claiming your story, Rachel," she told me once, her eyes steady. "You don't have to carry the weight of their choices or rewrite their narratives for them." I realized how much energy I had wasted trying to make Jessica's betrayal fit into a story where I was still the good daughter, the peacemaker who forgave everything and endured silently. It was exhausting and unnecessary. Letting go of that role wasn't betrayal, it was self-preservation. At work, I noticed subtle changes. I no longer hesitated when asked to speak up during meetings or share ideas. My students began to notice too. Some of them confided in me, sensing a new openness in the way I listened. Being present for them became a source of strength rather than just a duty. Maya was a constant reminder that life existed beyond pain and responsibility. One evening, she surprised me with tickets to a local theater production. As the curtain rose and the actors took the stage, I felt a spark of joy I hadn't known in years. That night, I let myself laugh fully without holding back. Ben, too, remained a gentle presence. Not a savior or a fixer, but someone who accepted me with my scars and all. Our conversations grew deeper, and though we never rekindled romance, the friendship we built was a balm. He reminded me that connection didn't have to be complicated or conditional. The antique store, once a place tinged with memories of loss, transformed into a haven of renewal. I began hosting small gatherings, support groups, workshops, even art shows that showcased local creatives who dealt with themes of healing and resilience. The business became an extension of my own journey, a tangible space where broken pieces were gathered and given new life. One afternoon, while sorting through a box of old letters and photographs, I found an untouched bundle of Dad's correspondence. Letters he had written but never sent, filled with regret and love. Reading his words, I felt a bittersweet mix of sorrow and forgiveness. He had been flawed like all of us, and though his favoritism had wounded me, it had not defined the entirety of his love. My relationship with Jessica remained distant, defined by silence more than words. The last time she reached out was through a card, an attempt at superficial kindness that felt hollow. I chose not to respond. Deleting her number from my phone wasn't an act of cruelty, it was a declaration of boundaries and self-respect. One evening, as I prepared to close the store, I held a delicate necklace, one of the heirlooms left behind by Mom. It was a fragile chain with a small locket inside, worn by time but beautiful still. Holding it in my palm, I understood that some parts of my past were worth carrying with me while others needed to be released. The next day I returned to the lake, the place that had become a symbol of my rebirth. The water was crisp against my skin as I slipped beneath the surface, letting the cool embrace wash over me. Floating there, I felt a profound sense of peace, not because the past had disappeared but because I no longer feared it. Emerging from the water, I looked toward the horizon, feeling the warmth of the sun on my face. For the first time in my life, I was fully present. Not invisible, not silenced, but alive and whole. The decision to start the podcast came from a small, persistent voice inside me that refused to be quiet any longer. It wasn't about exposing family secrets or seeking revenge. Instead, it was about creating a space where stories like mine, of emotional neglect, betrayal, and healing, could be heard without judgment. I wanted to give voice to the invisible, to the silenced. At first it was terrifying. Speaking into a microphone felt raw and vulnerable in a way that writing never did. But with each episode I found a new rhythm. I interviewed others who had survived toxic family dynamics, experts who offered insights on trauma, and listeners who shared their own journeys. The community that formed around the podcast surprised me. People from all walks of life, connected by the threads of pain and resilience. Recording the podcast was cathartic. I realized I was not just telling stories, I was rewriting mine. Each word spoken aloud chipped away at the walls I'd built around my heart. Ben became one of my first guests. His calm presence behind the microphone helped me feel safe as I confronted difficult memories. We talked honestly about the challenges of loving someone shaped by emotional neglect. How patience and understanding mattered, but so did boundaries and self-care. Meanwhile, Maya remained my steadfast cheerleader, always pushing me to take risks, to own my voice. She organized a launch party for the podcast at the antique store, inviting local friends and supporters. The room buzzed with warmth and encouragement, a stark contrast to the loneliness I'd felt for so long. With each passing week, I noticed a growing sense of financial independence. Monetizing the podcast through sponsorships and donations allowed me to think beyond just surviving. I began planning a workshop series, combining my counseling skills and personal experience, to help others break free from cycles of emotional repression. Despite the progress, the wounds Jessica left were never far from my mind. I'd learned to hold the pain without letting it consume me, but moments of doubt still crept in. Sometimes late at night I'd scroll through old texts, the ones where Dad talked about sharing everything 50-50, and wonder how differently things might have been. Yet instead of anger, what grew strongest was resolve. I was no longer a pawn in her game. I had built a life that belonged to me, a life grounded in truth, healing, and self-respect. Therapy continued to deepen my understanding. Dr. Grant encouraged me to explore forgiveness, not for Jessica but for myself. Forgiveness of the guilt I carried for feeling resentment, for wanting more than the role I'd been assigned as the quiet, dependable daughter. There's freedom in self-compassion, she reminded me. You don't need to carry this burden alone. I took that to heart. Gradually, I let go of the internalized blame, embracing instead a fierce love for the woman I was becoming. The antique store, once a relic of the past, now felt like a beacon of my future. I curated pieces that told stories of resilience, cracked pottery mended with gold lacquer, old furniture restored with care. Each item symbolized the beauty in imperfection, a mirror for my own journey. One crisp autumn day, as golden leaves drifted outside, Cousin Troy stopped by the store. His gruff kindness was comforting. "You've come a long way," he said, eyes sincere. "Jessica lost a lot when she shut you out." His words didn't sting like they might have before. Instead, they reaffirmed what I already knew. My worth wasn't defined by her choices or Dad's unfair will. That evening, I sat by the window holding the cracked photo frame, the one I'd carried through so many moments of pain and hope. I traced the fractures with my fingers and smiled quietly. The cracks didn't make it less beautiful, they made it real. I picked up my phone and deleted Jessica's number one last time. There was no anger in the gesture, only calm, deliberate closure. The following morning I returned to the lake. The water was cool and inviting as always. I swam slowly, savoring the sensation of freedom. When I emerged, I looked out across the horizon and whispered to myself, I am here. Not invisible. Not silenced. Present. Whole. And finally free. After that morning at the lake, a new chapter quietly unfolded in my life. The podcast had grown beyond my expectations, becoming a lifeline not only for listeners but for me. Each recorded episode was a step toward dismantling the walls I had spent decades building. Sharing my story and hearing others reminded me that trauma wasn't a solitary burden. It was a thread woven into many lives, but healing was possible. The workshop series I launched combined my professional skills as a school counselor with the raw lessons of my own experience. I created a curriculum focused on emotional boundaries, recognizing manipulative behavior and nurturing self-compassion. Leading these groups, watching participants find their voices, filled a part of me I hadn't known was starving. It was as though every session was a mirror, reflecting the journey I was still walking myself. Ben remained a steady presence. Our friendship deepened into something gentle and rare, comfortable silences, honest conversations, and a mutual respect that didn't demand too much or ask too little. He was the first person I'd allowed into my life after Dad's death without feeling the old, familiar grip of anxiety. With him, I didn't have to perform or hide parts of myself. Maya's unwavering belief in me became a quiet force I leaned on. She celebrated every milestone, big or small, reminding me that progress wasn't linear but always worth honoring. "You're no longer the girl who shrinks to fit the space," she said one evening over tea. "You're expanding, like you were meant to all along." Despite this forward momentum, the ghost of Jessica's betrayal lingered in unexpected ways. I caught myself sometimes wondering what it would have been like if she had chosen differently, if Dad's will had been honored as he intended. But the more I worked on myself, the more I understood that my peace didn't depend on rewriting her story. It depended on reclaiming my own. Therapy sessions with Dr. Grant became increasingly focused on forgiveness, not toward Jessica or my father but toward myself. She helped me recognize the years I'd blamed myself for Jessica's choices, for Dad's favoritism, for the silence that followed. "You deserved better," Elena said softly. "And now you're learning to give that to yourself." In those moments, I began to grieve not just the loss of my father but the loss of the sister I had hoped for. It was a quiet morning wrapped in acceptance and release. The antique store, once a symbol of a past burden, transformed into a sanctuary of renewal. I curated collections that celebrated resilience, furniture restored from splintered fragments, pottery repaired with gold lacquer, and jewelry that carried the patina of time. Each piece told a story of survival and beauty, echoing my own transformation. One chilly afternoon, Cousin Troy stopped by, his usually gruff demeanor softened by genuine warmth. "You've carved out something real here," he said, glancing around the cozy space. "Jessica may have taken the house and the papers, but she lost the heart of the family." His words didn't sting as they might have before. Instead, they felt like an acknowledgement of a truth I'd worked hard to claim, that my worth was not tethered to inheritance or approval. That evening, sitting by the window with the cracked photo frame resting in my hands, I traced its jagged edges, feeling the history etched into every fracture. The imperfections didn't diminish its beauty, they made it authentic. Like me. With a steady hand, I deleted Jessica's number from my phone for the final time. This act of digital severance was less about erasing her and more about reclaiming my boundaries, drawing a line that I would no longer cross. The next morning I returned to the lake. The water greeted me with its familiar chill, the coolness a balm against the warmth of the rising sun. I swam slowly, savoring the freedom in each stroke, letting the water carry away the last remnants of doubt and pain. As I emerged, breathing deeply, I looked out over the shimmering surface and whispered, "I am here." Not as the invisible daughter. Not as the betrayed sister. But as a woman who had found her voice, her strength, and her peace. Months passed, and with each one my life felt a little more mine. The podcast gained traction. Listeners from across the country shared their stories, their thank you messages reminding me how universal the pain of feeling unseen could be. I was no longer just the quiet counselor or the overlooked sister. I was becoming a voice for those who, like me, had learned to live in the margins. The workshop series flourished, drawing in people hungry for understanding and connection. Watching strangers open up about their own family wounds reminded me of how healing is often found in shared vulnerability. I sometimes caught myself thinking about Jessica, wondering if she ever felt the weight of what she'd done, or what she had lost in turning away. But I no longer needed answers or apologies from her. My peace didn't hinge on her recognition. It was rooted in the boundaries I'd set and the love I'd found for myself. Ben and I grew closer, sharing quiet dinners and weekend hikes, his presence a steady reminder that connection could be uncomplicated and kind. One evening, as we sat watching the sun dip below the trees, he reached over and took my hand. "You're not alone anymore," he said simply. Those words felt like a promise, a tether to a new kind of hope. Therapy continued to deepen my understanding of who I was, beyond the roles I'd been assigned, beyond the pain I'd endured. Dr. Grant helped me see that healing wasn't about forgetting the past, but integrating it with compassion and strength. The antique store became more than a business. It was a community hub. I started hosting monthly gatherings, book clubs, art therapy sessions, open mic nights. All spaces where stories like mine could be told without shame. The cracked photo frame, once a symbol of brokenness, now sat proudly on the store's mantelpiece, a testament to resilience. And then came the day I found the will again, carefully folded in an old box of Dad's things. It was the unsigned draft, the one that promised a 50-50 split. Holding it in my hands, I felt a surge of emotions, betrayal, grief, but also a quiet triumph. Jessica's manipulation could not erase that document from my memory or the truth it represented. With a decisive breath, I tore it into pieces, scattering the fragments into the wind outside the shop. It was a symbolic act, a shedding of the last chains tethering me to the past. Later that week, a birthday card arrived from Jessica. The handwriting was tentative, the message superficial. I read it once, folded it carefully, and placed it with the others I'd set aside long ago. No reply would come. My silence was no longer a sign of weakness but of strength. Returning to the lake that had become my sanctuary, I slipped into the water with a sense of freedom I had never known. The cool embrace enveloped me as I swam farther from shore than before, each stroke a quiet declaration: I am not invisible. I am not silent. I emerged, dripping and renewed, and looked toward the horizon, feeling the sun warm my face. The past was part of me, but it no longer defined me. I was here, whole, visible, and finally free. If Rachel's story touched something in you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Because sometimes the greatest act of healing isn't revenge or confrontation. It's finding the courage to speak out.